Now it's Husker Du, correct?
Husker Du.
Now it is with the umlaut. Is it an umlaut? The dots? I can't remember.
I think it is. Yeah. All right, so Husker Du's Zen Arcade. In the opening montage, you heard What's Going On, and now you're going to hear Pink Turns Blue. All right, so the numbers on Zen Arcade, it comes in at number 59 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 10 in 1984, number 433 of all time. It is Husker Du's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and it's not on Rolling Stone's list again, and the band Husker Du is ranked number 235 in overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Can I add one thing real quick, Matt? And it's going to be funny because some people are going to be listening to this as an album review, so it's going to be completely out of context. But consider this a tease to listen to the full episode. The sound I was going for that we were talking about in the Meat Puppets episode was sludge metal. So that's the sound I was going for. But continue. I apologize.
No problem. So this is Husker Du's second studio album. It's a double album. It's also a concept, rock opera, if you will. It was recorded in October of 1983, and I found this surprising. I didn't really see a whole lot of information on this, but it was released on July 1st, 1984, so it took a while for this actually to come out, despite the fact that one of the things that this record is known for is the fact that it was recorded and mixed in a very short period of time over the course of basically 3 days. And I'll get to a little bit more of that in just a second. But a little history on the band. They were formed in 1979, originally called Buddy and the Returnables. That band, the original lineup included Bob Mould on guitar and vocals, Grant Hart on drums and vocals, Greg Norton on bass and vocals, and Charlie Pine on keyboards. They met. Bob Mould met Grant Hart at Macalester. Well, Bob Mould was a student at Macalester College in Minnesota, and he met Hart at a record store in St. Paul called Cheapo Records. Hart was actually a clerk there, and they bonded over a shared love of the Ramones, not the Sex Pistols, but that's usually where you go. But yeah, they were both Ramones
or Velvet
fans.
Underground. It's
or Velvet Underground, exactly. So and then Hart had originally met Norton, the bass player, when they both applied for the same job that Hart ended up getting, and then they got both him and this guy Charlie Pine to join the band, and they started playing shows, mostly doing covers. And but unbeknownst to Pine, the other band members did not like the sound of the band with the keyboards there, and they started practicing without him. They didn't let him know where they were going to go, and they just kind of ditched him. So it's kind of one of those deals. They got their new name. It was originated during a rehearsal when they were working on the Talking Heads' Psycho Killer, and they were unable to recall exactly what they were saying in French when the French portion of the song came up. So they just decided to start inserting any foreign language words in that part that they could think of. And one of those was Husker Du, which was the name of a popular 1970s memory board game. It's kind of like a kid's game. Husker Du actually means "Do you remember" in Danish. And so they decided to go with that band. And they end up firing Pine shortly after their first performance as Husker Du in March of 1979. And they continue to play in Minneapolis. And they became one of the first hardcore punk bands in the Midwest. That's how they started off. It was very much hardcore. And that's when they got the attention of Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys. And they eventually later on did sign on to SST, which we talked about earlier with the Meat Puppets. So they released 2 albums, Land Speed and Everything Falls Apart. Land Speed was more of a live album, and Everything Falls Apart was more of a studio album. And they were kind of known as a band that played ridiculously fast. Actually, there's a short documentary that I saw online called "The Fastest Band in the World," and everybody was just blown away by how fast the three-piece played together. And it was very much starting off in the realm of the hardcore punk movement. and they got the attention of the Minutemen, which is another, I think we're going to be covering them shortly as well. And they helped them release a single on their label. And in 1983, they released a EP called Metal Circus, and that starts to take them in a little bit more of a melodic direction. Bob Mould was kind of getting a little, I don't want to say tired, but he wanted to do something a little different and wanted to start incorporating more melody into the hardcore sound, which for some people they really liked. It definitely got them more of an audience, but for the true fans, some of them were off put by this. They didn't want a lot of melody in their hardcore. They just wanted more energy and anger. So, but that's what Zen Arcade became known as, is because it's a very melodic take on hardcore punk.
Yep.
And it tells the story of a young man who runs away from an unfulfilling home life only to find that the outside world is even worse. So it's kind of a traditional take on a rock opera, if you will. But this is considered a central album in the beginning of what became known as alternative rock. There are during the recording session, they recorded 25 tracks, and every single one of the songs on this record, with the exception of 2, were recorded in one take. So this was done over, like, I think the course of about 40 hours of total recording, and they would just go in, play a song, do it, track it, that's the one where it's going to go on the record. So, and then it took about another 40 hours to mix it. All told, there's about 85 hours total, and a cost of $3,200 to make this record.
Wow.
Around this time, they also had released a cover of the Byrds' 8 Miles High, which was a song that they had done during these sessions, which was basically just kind of a warm-up. But that actually became a single and did pretty well for them overall. No singles from this album were released because they wanted it to be listened to as a whole. And I also found this funny. This double album is 70 minutes long compared to their debut album, which was a crisp 19 minutes and 22 seconds long. So they
just averages out.
Yeah, both ends of the spectrum here. So I could do a description of the actual plot, but I don't know if you guys want to hear that, so maybe I'll just skip over that.
I do.
You want to hear it?
I do.
All right. Okay, so here you go. Zen Arcade tells the story of a young man who runs away to escape a miserable and abusive home life.
I got that from the lyrics.
Okay. Yep. The character briefly joins the military. He turns to religion and seems to find a tenuous peace through love before losing his lover to drugs. He reaches a point. Okay. He reaches a point of despair. He reaches a point of despair, ultimately concluding that he won't be able to change his circumstances before waking up to find that the whole odyssey had occurred in his subconscious during a night of troubled sleep.
Okay.
The challenges of his life, for better or worse, remain in front of him. Recurring dreams is the disorienting 14-minute instrumental that reprises a shorter instrumental interlude closes the album. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you know,
like
is
SF
it real?
Sorrow?
Well, it's like, is it real? Is it a dream? But it kind of is a dream, and nothing's really changed. Like it's like a circular kind of thing, almost like The Wall was kind of like that. You know, it's
Tommy.
Yeah. So there you go.
It's a lot similar to SF Sorrow. That's actually really remarkably similar.
So the person died. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. The album did sell well, but SST only released 3,500 to 5,000 copies, so they really didn't release a whole lot, and so it sold out pretty quickly. And it was out of stock for months then because they just didn't have the bandwidth, I guess, to produce more records. So the band was kind of pissed off by this. In his review for Rolling Stone, David Frick describes Zen Arcade as the closest hardcore will ever get to an opera, a kind of thrash quadrophenia.
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, that works too.
Funny.
Yep.
This inspired the Minutemen to release a double album of their own called Double Nickels and Dime. Double Nickels on the Dime, which that's the album I think we're going to cover.
Yep,
We're covering that soon.
That was that was inspired by this.
Episodes.
Yep. And I have a couple of final thoughts on Husker Du. Well, this is the one bio we're doing. We are going to cover the next album after this. But this is the final bio episode we're going to do. So that's a little history on the record, and I think we got to go with Josh on reactions to Zen Arcade. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, this is another surprising album. This is one of those bands that I always heard about and knew about but never listened to, and I really like this album. This is really the sweet spot for me between that hardcore and punk and like melody, and they seem to do it really well. in combining it. It's almost like a mixture of hardcore and pop at times, which is kind of a contradiction in some ways, but for whatever reason, they blend it together really well in kind of the way that the Meat Puppets take country and punk and combine that. This, I did not, for whatever reason, pick up on the concept album. I didn't look that up listening to it, but when Matt was describing it, I was reading through the tracks and following along, so it's definitely there. I didn't think it would be for some reason I thought it would be more, I don't know, just rock focused as opposed to hardcore, so that really kind of threw me off at first, but then I really got on the rhythm of it and responded to it. They seem to go kind of all over the place at times. There's an acoustic song or an acoustic interlude type of song in Never Talking to You Again that's really nice. They have these really nice melodies in their songs as well. I think that was what kind of caught my attention and was appealing listening to it. On a song like Hare Krishna, it sounded like they were that song I Want Candy. The chorus kind of sounded like that. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but then they kind of, you get a little comfortable in what they're doing, and then they throw some hardcore songs in with screaming, and that's another thing. I really kind of like the lead singer's voice as well. It's powerful, and he's able to kind of has this range where he can sing in all these different kind of genres almost. It works really well. There's a song kind of in the middle called The Biggest Lie, which has this like really almost like metal guitar part at the beginning, which was awesome. It's funny, Matt, the two songs you picked were like two of my favorite tracks on the album. What's Going On has this it's really melodic with like piano pounding in the background, and the guitar kind of sounds like Smashing Pumpkins. I really like that one. They kind of repeat lyrics at times over and over again. Like on that song, it says, "I was talking when I should have been listening." They say that over the piano and stuff. I really like that. There's some harmonizing too, or at least backing vocals in a song like Masochism World. Another great song is the one right after that, Standing by the Sea. For a double album, this was a really like fun adventure because it seemed to like improve the more I listened to it, and the further in you get on the sides, that kind of have, I don't know, it's like shifting in some ways. It's a little hardcore, and then it transitions to something like easier to listen to and poppier, and then it kind of goes back and forth, like almost like waves, like cresting and falling into these different things. And I can just see the other thing that stood out is I can just see the influence on 90s indie rock on this album. It seems like all over the place on a song like Newest Industry, which I think is on the third the A side of the second album. And I really like the incorporation of the piano too throughout the album. Even the 14-minute last track, Reoccurring Dreams, has this kind of, I don't know, it reminded me of a 70s song. It kind of lulls you into it, even though it's very much repeating at times. And it just all the way through, it was a pleasure to listen to. It was a little, there's kind of a learning curve to it, but I really enjoyed going on the journey, and I can see why they would want it listening to as a full album. I do feel like there is something with this album in particular that you get from listening to it all at once. And one time I listened to like the first album and then the second album, and with a break in between. But yeah, I was surprised and pleased by this album for sure.
Yeah, this is a really good one, guys. I have always kind of come to Husker Du at an interesting spot, and that they always were on compilation types that I would get. So before we're focusing here, you know, on Zen Arcade, right? I would listen to Husker Du songs, and I wasn't sure if it was on this. I think they had an album, New Day Rising. I think they have another one, Candy Apple Gray, right? And for me, the songs, I never thought of them as albums, which is kind of interesting because this is so clearly designed as a concept album, and it congeals as a concept album. So I think it's one of those weird things, like, where sometimes you guys will tell me, Matt in particular, it's like, I came to this band as a singles band. And it's sort of like, how can you think of this band as a singles band? You know, they're an album band. And my guess would be Husker Du, as we listen, is going to be somewhat similar, even though I came to them in a non-traditional way. I would agree with Josh that this is the sweet spot between super abrasive hardcore and a more melodic version of punk. At times, because of the track volume and the difference in sound, Josh, I thought of it similar to like those old Punkorama
yes,
comps you
that
get.
definitely came to mind.
Yeah, and it felt like a Punkorama because you're getting sort of a punk influenced thing, but it's coming from different angles, and people are doing different takes of it, right? Like super aggressive followed by more poppy, and so it had that vibe for me a little bit, that you were like listening to a compilation almost, obviously way ahead of the time for that. There's some truly great songs I knew on this one, because they're the ones that get earmarked for compilations, right? Like Something I Learned Today, Chartered Trips, Pink Turns to Blue, right? Those are the three that showed up on many comps I'd get when people would make something and be like, here's like, you know, 7 or 8 artists you should listen to at a cassette tape, I think, is initially when I got introduced to Husker Du. But you know, you're getting a couple tracks each time. I think where my knowledge of Husker Du got better is I had a colleague when I was teaching who was about a decade older than me, and he loved, you know, 80s underground, you know, rock. And he's just like, here's basically everybody you need to know. Who do you know? And I knew a fair amount, but there were some where I was like, you know, I've read that name. And, you know, because you hear these names, right? At that time, it's hard for me to explain to someone how much, like, you'd hear these names in Spin, or especially Spin or Rolling Stone or NME, right? And you'd have these names, and somewhat you'd have an idea in your mind of what these bands would sound like. But you didn't quite know. You just knew they showed up on these things. And so there would be some that I knew immediately, right? You know, you'd have like Sonic Youth and stuff that I was very familiar with their stuff, the Smiths, you know, different stuff. And then there'd be bands that you'd see and you'd be like, you know, I wonder what they sound like. And some you'd chase it, and some you had in your mind what it sounded like. So it wasn't really till I got that comp tape from my colleague that I figured out, oh, Husker Du is basically like a punk band and even a hardcore band, but dialed up with melodic elements that continue to present themselves album to album, it sounds like, along the way. So I kind of knew what I was getting into this week, but I'd never listened to the album in entirety. Concept wise, it was pretty coherent, Matt, I have to say, lyrically. Now the thing is, you have to read the lyrics, so it's a throwback to that, because you're not picking up the lyrics as you're listening, because at times it goes into like pure hardcore and stuff, and you're just hearing a wall of sound. But I did listen with the old microphone icon thing up in Spotify for one of my listens, to get an idea. Once I realized from the bits and pieces I got, I'm like, okay, this is clearly a concept album. I was piecing together bits and pieces, right? And yeah, and it kind of congeals together, so I have to give them credit, even if it trods over familiar themes. So yeah, this was a strong recommendation. This is one I always get curious about, because I pretty quickly surmised that Josh was going to like this album. I don't know where Matt's going to stand on this album, so I've kind of set the tone, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts were, Matt.
So I've known the band name Husker Du for many, many years. I've known Bob Mould. I knew that he was like one of the main guys of the band. In recent years, I know that he's been doing a lot of solo records, and I've listened to plenty of Bob Mould records of the last like 10 or 15 years.
Can I add one thing too to that, Matt, real quick? That's interesting. Did you know, Josh, that Bob Mould was a writer for WCW Wrestling for a year and a half in the late 90s? Yeah. There's I have to jump in here real quick for Matt, because I apologize for doing it. There's actually, I knew that, and I looked it up. I was like, I just want to see if it's in his bio on Wikipedia. And it said, after the 1998 tour, Mold took a break from the music world to get involved with another passion of his, professional wrestling, when he joined WCW as a scriptwriter in 1999. Creative differences with some of the other writers led to him leaving the company. However, in the liner notes for his 2002 album Modulate, he thanks some of the workers he worked with, most notably Kevin Nash and Kevin Sullivan. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. I thought that was funny. But continue, Matt. I'm sorry.
I didn't know any of that.
No, that was deep cut, yeah.
But I knew his stuff, and I knew he's got a band called Sugar that he formed as well. They did a couple of records, and I liked some of the stuff from that too. So this was not what I was expecting going in. So my initial reaction was being surprised. This was much harder and faster, and hardcore was not something I thought I was going to hear. So I was taken aback a little bit, and my initial reaction was, man, this is a lot of an album to take in, like this heavy energy for an hour and 10 minutes. You know, and then I did some of the research, and I started seeing the themes of, oh, this is where hardcore goes melodic, and I was like, my initial reaction was like, I don't find this terribly melodic. I find this very heavy and more in the hardcore genre. So, but the more I listened to it, the more I was getting. I saw those elements peppered throughout pretty much most of the songs, and I started liking it more. I think, but because of that, really kind of being surprised by what I was getting from what I was expecting, it took me longer to get into this than I think it might have ordinarily if I wasn't, going in with any type of expectation. Mm-hmm. I really like how it starts. I think the first 4 or 5 songs are pretty strong, but then I think that I'm a little down on probably where it starts to go from Indecision Time through maybe Pride. So there's like I think that's like a 4 song, and even a little bit to a lesser extent, I'll Never Forget You, where I think I'm not hearing a ton of melody in those songs. I think those are probably the songs that are more straight up hardcore than the rest of the album. Yep. And so I think, and that's kind of right in the middle of the first half of the record. And so I think that having that early it turned me off a little bit. But it does come back. It's got something like, The Biggest Lie, What's Going On, I really like. And that song, that's like the one guest that they have on this record. There's a guest vocal performance by Des Cadena. Do you guys know who that is?
Yeah, he was in, was he one of the singers for Dead Kennedys, right?
Nope, close. Black Flag.
He
was a Black Flag.
Right.
Yeah. So,
gotcha,
so he sings on that. So that was another.
He's the dude who blew out his voice, I think, if I remember correctly, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's singing on that song, So, and I think that when you get to side 3, when it starts with like Somewhere, One Step at a Time, Pink Turns Blue, Newest Industry, that to me is the sweet spot of the record. That's where I really started kind of when I. Upon the 4th listen or so, that's when I was like, okay, they're reeling it back in. I started seeing the melody more, and I like the way that it ends. Turn on the News is a great song too.
Yeah, I like that song.
That actually sounds like a Foo Fighters song, and that's when I started kind of picking up on other bands that I was hearing in this, right? So definitely Turn on the News reminded me of the Foo Fighters. There's songs on here that remind me of bands around today, a band like Titus Andronicus or Japandroids that have a very full...
Yeah, good call on the first one for sure.
Yeah, like a very full sound, but there's a punk ethos to it. There's a lot of energy.
Car seat headrest.
Okay. Are they that heavy though?
No, not as heavy, but Elements I think is.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking just like the heavier, like and the punk influence with the melody, So, so I definitely see the influence of that there as well, and other and later stuff that Mold would do. So, so this was kind of an interesting, a trip for me. I think it's a bit long still. I mean, with as a double album, I would probably shave several songs off of it, probably the ones that I mentioned there before. But when I kind of got over that initial being surprised at what I was getting, because I had I thought this was going to be more of a power pop album, to be honest. So I was really getting, that's why it was hard for me to kind of get past that. But I think I eventually did, and these last couple of days of listening to this, particularly like I said, that second album, the second album in particular, I think is more consistent for me. And I saw a lot of elements that I liked here. So a lot of energy, and they are fast, right? And like you said, Josh, I think there's parts in here where they're doing like full blown, almost like metal, like guitar solos, and guitar solos isn't really something you find a whole lot in punk, like historically speaking, but they're kind of bringing in a little metal aspect and noise rock aspect, and even grunge rock, that was kind of coming in later on, that you could see with an alternative rock in general, which this was influenced on. So I like this. I think overall I am a thumbs up. I think it's a lot. I think it's for people, if you don't like your music loud or fast or heavy, it's gonna be kind of tiring, I think, because even though there are a couple of spots where it lets up, like Never Talking to You Again, is like the acoustic song. There's a quick piano like kind of interlude here. What is it? Monday Will Never Be the Same. But overall, it's a lot of energy. So you got to kind of buckle in for this. But it's good, man. It definitely grew on me over time. So I'm a thumbs up on it.
Yeah, the one time I listened to this, I was kind of in a bad mood, or I had a bad day, and it was like just the right energy and tone I needed to like lift my spirits. It sucked out all the bad stuff through its sound. So I really like that. If there was a mosh pit, I probably would have gone in it or something. But so that was the main thing, Matt. And I was gonna ask Matt, hearing those solo records they did and Sugar, those were far different, I assume, than
it's
this?
poppier, right?
Okay.
It's not like the hardcore elements are not there near, there's some heavier moments, but not to this extent. Sugar, I just remember one song in particular called If I Can't Change Your Mind, that's just a total pop song. It's not, very crisp, very catchy, and just not like this at all. So yeah, I was taken. I didn't know Husker Du was they were a hardcore band. That's how they started.
Yeah.
So I was surprised by that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. I felt like the energy really elevated me on this album, and I talked about that in a different way on when we did The Cure, right? Pornography that was there, but this is one where some people I think might say this is an angry album, but this is the type of album that has aggression to it, and I do connect sometime with aggressive music, and I know some folks don't, they like their music dialed down a little bit, but some of that testosterone from hardcore, I think, gets filtered a little bit more cleanly here, right? As opposed to just the pure on animalistic stuff that the pure Minor Threat or Black Flag and stuff like that's there. This kind of refines the edges a little bit on it, but it's still there, bubbling over. And it's funny you mention Turn on the News, because that's always been the one Husker Du song that was on comps that I really disliked. And so it's funny that you mentioned it sounds like a Foo Fighters song, because that tracks, because that's kind of that's not really who I want Husker Du to sound like, Foo Fighters. So but and no knock on Dave Grohl or Foo Fighters, but that's very mainstream. So that one actually, I don't agree with you in that sense, Matt, that I don't feel that's where the album really shapes in. I actually feel the album starts great, has a hardcore patch, really flies through to 18, and then kind of a little bit at the end, I feel fades out a little when it goes stories, and obviously reoccurring dreams, is this 14-minute epic at the end that actually fits kind of for what they're going for. So I wasn't against it, but yeah, I think I like the intrusion of the true hardcore stuff too. Is it Beyond the Threshold and Pride and stuff? It's this 1-2 punch of pure hardcore that almost are a combined. Yeah,
Indecision Time I'd throw in there too.
Indecision Time,
part of that. But yeah, I think for hardcore, this is hardcore that I can get down to, I think, overall, when for those types of things.
And I don't like to just genre pigeon, because this is a lot of things. It's not just there's definite pop sensibility.
But it's cool. But it's cool to listen to a record like this, because I could have gone into this before this and saying I hate hardcore, that has zero redeemable qualities. But what you're seeing here is you're seeing the hybrid nature, where it does blend into a more of a pop area, or more of a more melodic kind of area, and how it kind of bridged the gap into other genres that I do like, or other bands that I do like. So for that, it's kind of a cool experience, because it's oh yeah, you can kind of see the melding of those kind of things together. So so that was kind of a cool experience for me.
Well, and we've seen that before with the Dead Kennedys with punk, right? Where they took it there. And I go all the way back. I mean, kind of the guy who when we first did this in the 60s, Frank Zappa, who took blues, rock, and jazz and did this sort of weird at times pop sensibility and at times avant-garde take on it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so it kind of all goes back. We've had like these artists that sort of do that, where they take a sort of a sound and they put their own spin on it. And I feel like that's what Husker Du is to some degree doing with hardcore. Although there's a lot of bands that are doing hardcore adjacent stuff at this period. We keep stumbling into that. I mean, we're gonna do the Minutemen, which is another take on that, but like it's
Mission of Burma kind of had
and
a little
Meat Puppets. The Meat Puppets were somebody that went hardcore adjacent as well. Same thing. They were same scene. So yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not even covering like Bad Brains and Minor Threat, and Fugazi we're gonna do later. So I mean, there's a lot of branches of this tree, right? So
yeah, no, for sure. I also like this. Also reminded me of Wayne's World top 10 bands that sound like diseases. Husker Du. Oh, it hurts when I pee. I think I've got a Husker Du.
I'll be interested to see how their sound evolves. I know New Day Rising, I saw was on that post-punk list,
and that one, from what I understand, that goes more on the pop. That's poppier than this. They start ditching the hardcore stuff.
Yeah,
I looked at where the songs that were on the comps were, and I would say definitely it is. Although I wouldn't say they ever get like accessible. You know what I'm saying? They kind of they keep it edgy, all the way through. But yeah, they're still very much clearly one foot in the world of aggressive punk, music at this point, while like they said, while expanding into different themes. By that point, I mean, I think they're major label at that point too, so that makes a difference too in terms of what they'll accept. But I mean, the Replacements started as a largely hardcore punk band and melded into this power pop band. So there's all kinds of people. That's going to be a theme.
Yeah, they were contemporaries. They would play together, and they would like with Husker Du.
Angry young men didn't need chops, right? And then you start to develop chops. And that's the Clash were like that, right? Like they were like punksters, and then it's like, oh, guess what? They turned into pretty damn good musicians in the punk scene,
Yeah, I think the Replacements is the band that I thought they would sound like, because aren't they also from Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I always linked them in my mind, and so probably the sound also fused, not knowing what Husker Du sound like. So
yeah, it's funny because you guys say that's funny because, like I said, I went through that, but much younger because I found out what they sounded like. So I was not caught off guard with it. But I'm trying to think back like the first time I heard it. I think I thought they were going to be like more of a straight ahead punk band when I heard them for the first time, or noise rock. I think that was kind of, and to some degree they are. Like, so I wasn't necessarily wrong, but so I might have had a little bit more of an inclination of what I was getting into. But yeah, this is a strong thumbs up for me too. 2 for 2 this week for sure. For me.
Is it the best double album of the 80s so far? Maybe.
We're still early in the 80s.
Yeah. Just a quick postscript here. They released a couple more albums, but their tensions grew after, I guess, their manager committed suicide in 1987. So Bob Mould started taking more of managerial duties on, and he and Hart were kind of butting heads. Hart was also taking methadone to kick his heroin habit. But I guess they were on tour, and the bottle of methadone that he had leaked. And so Bob Mould was concerned that Hart wouldn't be able to play the remaining dates due to the withdrawal. So he canceled the dates and the remaining shows. And then Hart got pissed off about that. He quit the band. And if they officially disbanded in January of 1988. They all went on to do different things. Bob Mould in particular got into producing. He produced he actually did a Soul Asylum album. That was another band that was from that area in the Midwest. And he actually I think he produced one of the more recent Titus Andronicus albums from a couple years ago.
It makes sense because they're clearly influenced by Husker Du. Yeah.
Yeah. But Hart and Mould did reunite in October of 2004 during a benefit show for ailing Soul Asylum bassist Carl Mueller, who had cancer. So they played a couple of songs together, but Mould later said that should not be taken as a sign that Husker Du were going to reunite. And unfortunately, Hart died of liver cancer on September 13th, 2017, which is just about the 5-year anniversary of that. That just happened, the 5-year anniversary of that a couple days ago. They are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but on March 30th, 2019, the 40th anniversary of their first show, Mould played a show in St. Paul where he was supported by Gordon's band, a band named Porcupine, and each of them played one of Heart's songs in tribute to the late drummer. So they're both around. They're both still doing music and stuff, but Husker Du is definitely no longer.
So 3 thumbs up from all of us. Well, 6 thumbs up, or all of us approve.
Sure.
All right.
We gotta work on those transitions for you, Josh.
Yeah. I get used to my segments. I can't do anything else.